We are going to get going. So good morning, everyone, and special welcome to Varna and Anand, who are our speakers for today. Thank you for being here and agreeing to do this. This is the second of our sessions on emergent practices in South Asia, which is part of the larger project, the State of Architecture in South Asia, which is a collaboration between the Harvard School of Design, the South Asia Institute at Harvard University, the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute, the South Asia GST Students Group, and the Architectural Foundation in Mumbai. So this project, as I sort of explained in our opening session, but I'll sort of recap, is a project that is designed and situated to create a platform at many levels for a conversation on architecture in South Asia. And we believe this sort of setting up a kind of collective set of questions will resonate not only across the different countries in the South Asia regions, but the gathered reflections will be mutually productive given the incredible common ground we historically and culturally share. And of course, the questions we are asking is, what does the practice of architecture mean for the next generation? Can architecture address the abject inequalities, iniquities that surround us in South Asia? What does it mean for women architects in South Asia, for the making of the architect, which is architectural education? And so the project is broken up into a number of components. What we have kicked off with is this series, which is on emergent practices in South Asia. We are going to be also doing events on the modality of practice, that is making architecture in South Asia, the architecture of transitions, which is frameworks and practices in South Asia, which will take the form of a conference. And we aspire to put all this together in some form, either an exhibition or a document. Our first speakers, when we kicked this off on September 17th, which was also a Saturday a few weeks ago, we had Nirupal Adhikari from Nepal, and we had Rizvi Hassan from Bangladesh, who kicked off the lecture series with, I think, a very interesting follow-up discussion, which got us going. Our next session will be on Saturday, October 15th with Binu Daniel and Rohan Chauhan. And then the following 3 Saturdays, we will announce next week once that is firmed up. And we will also begin to start moving the discussion to Bhutan, to Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So that's, and we are simultaneously also running some in-person lectures, which won't be streamed, but they will be recorded and uploaded on YouTube. So watch out for that, and we will keep you posted as we mail and move along. So for today's session, our 2 speakers are Varna Shashidhar, who is a landscape architect with a regional landscape practice, which is called VSLA. The practice focuses on the creation of contextual landscapes. She is a graduate with a Bachelor's of Architecture from the RVCE College and obtained a master's degree in landscape architecture from Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. She taught at the GSD's Career Discovery Program and has worked with leading landscape practices here in the US before she established her own practice in 2013. Her intersections really lie in the intersection of the built and the natural world, and in the ecology and aesthetics of everyday South Asian landscapes. And her projects have included degraded and ecologically sensitive environments. Her recent projects include the Bangalore International Center, which had a commendation award from the IIA, which is the Indian Institute of Architects in 21, the Neve Academy, the Brivisky, the Naman Park, a neighborhood park in Bangalore. She has presented her work at the Kala Ghoda Festival in Mumbai in 2020, the Singapore Institute of Architects annual conference in 2019. But also, Varna is the founder of a Design United platform for regional connection and collaboration of emerging designers and students of design from South Asia, which they established during the pandemic in March 2020. And that also resonates with what we are trying to do here. And I hope we will, at some point, create some more formal and productive overlaps. Anand Sunecha founded C-Lab in 2015 after working with Professor Doshi in India and Alvaro Siza and Carlos Castanera in Portugal. His projects include the Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, which really marked the beginning of the architecture practice with the renovation of dilapidated historic houses into volunteers' homes, and the construction of Jai Jagat Theatre, which I hope he might show as a part of the centenary celebrations of the Sabarmati Ashram. His later works include the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired Children, housing for a community affected by leprosy, and workshop building in the Indubai Parekh School of Architecture in Rajkot. His works have also been exhibited in the Alliance Française in Delhi, the Faculty of Art and Design and Humanities in De Montfort University in the UK, and recently participated in 2021 in the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism. The Jai Jagat Theatre is a project that has really got a lot of attention, the project that he did in the Sabarmati Ashram. It was also published in Casabella in Italy with an essay responding to the project by Alvaro Siza. And in 2016, C-Lab started Forum in Ahmedabad with friends, an open platform to meet, share, discuss work, encourage dialogues on architecture. And he's also been teaching since 2015 at CEPT in Ahmedabad, and has been a graduate thesis co-advisor in the Politecnico di Milano in Italy. And it's interesting, both of them, these are both young practices, but they have also put some effort into trying to create forums for discussions. And that's why, again, I just highlight that because it resonates with what we are doing. And I think a collection of platforms like this will only make the discussions around architecture in our region much more robust. So with that, Anand, I'm going to request you to start first, if you don't mind, and then that will be followed by Varna. Varna, you can share your screen after Anand is done. Thank you very much and look forward to these talks. And we will reconvene at the end for discussion and take questions from the audience. So thank you. Anand, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning and good evening, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be part of this lecture series and present along with Varna, whose work I really admire. Before I share our works, I will briefly talk about the context we are based. We live and work in Ahmedabad. This is our small studio where we work from. Ahmedabad is a city with rich culture and complex layers of architecture, ranging from historic mosques, stepwells to modern buildings of Le Corbusier, Kahn, Charles Correa, Bibi Doshi, and many others. The city even today has a strong culture of architecture, and it has produced large community of architects, but still one can feel isolated in this city. With all these great works in front of you, constantly influencing you and setting a benchmark, they can be a great reference while also a baggage. Therefore, it can be inspiring, but at the same time, difficult for a young architect to practice architecture in this city. Our architecture practice began with the projects in historic Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, where Mahatma Gandhi lived and led the struggle for independence for 13 years from 1917 to 1930. Manav Sadhana, an NGO based in Ashram, gave us the first opportunity. This was the house where Mahatma Gandhi lived. It is Hriday Kunj. In 2017, we built a small theater, a place for performances for children, as a part of 100 years of Ashram. With this project, we had an opportunity to work in a complex historical and natural context. We worked with frugal resources, built a simple place, striving to be open for all, young or old, rich or poor, where one can be together or alone. I will not present this project in detail today, but some approaches and learnings from this project remain consistent in our later works, such as frugality, building the essential, rigorous engagement with the place and people, working slowly, and quest for beauty for everyone. Today, I'm going to show two projects, School for the Blind and Visually Impaired Children, and a housing for a community in Wastal that we completed recently. Blindness is a spectrum, and it is rare that is absolute. Only 15% of people with blindness see nothing at all. The majority of people who are blind perceive light and color, while those with different impairments have varying degree of usable vision. Approximately 39 million people are blind in the world, and India accounts to 20% of the population who are blind, which is around 8 million. Two friends, both blind, Rahman Bhai and Hargobind Bhai, started the school with 4 children in a village near Gandhinagar. Earlier, most villages in India had no formal facilities of education for blind children. And there are a lot of superstition which surrounds the blindness. So the residential school, which was dedicated to the education and well-being for the blind children from remote villages across India. Just to give a little bit of context of Gandhinagar, it is a city capital of Gujarat, which is away 25 kilometers from Ahmedabad. And the site that we got was around 9,000 square meters with an existing primary school building, which had a dining facility and a small kitchen. On one side, on the west, there was a public garden, and around were the government housing. This is the existing plan of the existing building, where girls and boys lived on the ground floor, where in each room there were 12 to 14 students living, and it was very inconvenient. And the school ran on the first floor, where classrooms were created using partitions. They were small and they were very noisy. So the brief was to design a new school with 10 classrooms, music room, and renovate the existing building into the hostel facilities for blind children to live comfortably. In addition, the hostel facility aimed to invite young students studying in Gandhinagar and senior citizens who live alone for a mixed community living. The location that we got had like very large dimension, 81 meters by 57 meters. And there were this existing building on this. And we got this project in 2015. And we didn't have many references of some schools. There are some schools which are designed specifically for blind children, but we didn't come across many of them which could be a reference. But we started very intuitively with the ideas of linear movement with no edges, or a school in a contained garden which is safe and accessible. There were some preconceived ideas that started this project. Also, we were thinking of classroom as individual cells because the budget was a constraint, so it could be developed incrementally. And I was also thinking that if each classroom could be of different characteristic, of different shape and volume, which could be of bring in different light and experiences for the children. So I worked on this proposal for almost a year. And when I went to Perkins School for the Blind in the United States, it's in Watertown, which is very near to Cambridge. And I worked there for 4 months. And it is the most beautiful campus that I have seen, where Helen Keller and Laura Bridgman and Anne Sullivan, they're all stalwarts who studied there. Even Charles Dickens mentioned about this school in his American note. That was the only positive note that he wrote about America. At Perkins, I was working in the toddlers program and hearing lab in the library, and some of the lessons that I learned was about the navigations was through hearing, through touch, through smell, and through partial vision. After I came back to India, I re-looked at the project and restarted with these new learnings. Some of the ideas remain consistent, but some new ideas also emerged, like the contained garden with the movement space around was something which I felt was necessary because of the size of the plot, where I felt that students should not get lost. And also I started looking at the movement spaces at different scales. So the volumes on the entrance created wider corridor with wide and a tall height versus the opposite, a very narrow space with a low volume that could create a very different sense of sound and echo when students move, because they use clapping as a way to navigate spaces. Also, the idea of classroom as cells, which could be incremental, which could be built over the period of time that remain consistent and with different geometries and different experiences. So the project is a very simple geometric building, which revolves around the central courtyard, where there are special classrooms which has lower ceiling height and the light being brought from the top. And there are other classrooms which has private courtyards with specific plant species, which has a unique characteristic of its own. And also the corridor, we were thinking of creating, treating them with a different corner so it can become a point of identification for students. So this is the section of the school where you can see the classroom opens to the courtyard directly, and it is very important for natural light and ventilation. Also thinking about diffuse light through the courtyards. This is the section through the classrooms, which are special classrooms, which I was mentioning, where the light is brought from the rooftop, and the entrance corridor gently slopes down to a narrow and smaller side on the opposite, where it could create a very different sort of an experience for students. And you can see there are very less openings on the periphery of the building. And the openings that you see are openings to the courtyard, because diffuse light was a very important aspect that for low vision students, they get really affected with direct light, and it could become very uncomfortable for students. So there was a constant effort of thinking about what would be appropriate light condition inside of the classrooms. And we also thought that light could be element which also gives signs. For example, we thought that the entrance of the classroom, of the special classroom, could be a tall volume where light is brought as a light shower. So it creates a contrast on the surface where students can also perceive the entrance of the classroom. Whereas we also thought light as a focal point, that where it also guides you towards, it attracts you towards the other side. Also, we were looking at different textures. So we looked at floor textures where each classroom entrance has rough textures. So we use Kota stone as a basic building material, rough and smooth. So every classroom entry has a rough Kota entry. So students get an understanding that there is an entry to the classroom. So you can see from this picture, it's a very subtle change in the texture, which helps students understand the difference in materiality. Also, wall texture became very important for the navigation. So on the peripheral, on the entire periphery, there is a sand-faced plaster, so students can understand the spaces outside and inside. Whereas inside has a different texture, where the classroom wall adjacent to the classroom has a smooth texture, whereas the courtyard wall has a semicircular texture. And this is a contained open space, so there is a difference. Student can understand the difference between the outside sand-faced plaster versus this. In which direction student move, that was another question. So on the horizontal longer surface, we looked at the plaster which are the longer grains, whereas on the shorter side we created vertical textures. So student can identify either they are on the shorter side of the build form or are on the longer side. So these are the textures that we tested out on site, and it was with a great effort of the contractor. We made several samples, student tested out, and we could get accurate grains after a lot of testing. Landscape also was another important strategy. Lokendra Balasarya was a landscape architect for the project, and more than 1,000 shrubs, plants, and trees of 37 species are planted on campus to provide shade, fruits, invite butterflies and birds, diversify and improve the natural environment. Each classroom opens to a private courtyard with aromatic plants and trees, and aromatic trees with specific foliages were selected for the courtyard to allow natural light to the classrooms. Traditional rainwater harvesting technique of 10 feet diameter and 30 feet depth also was created to recharge the ground, which can absorb 45,000 to 60,000 liters of water in 1 hour. So this was the condition of the school when the landscape plan was going on. This is a photograph when it was built recently. And yes, I just went to the school yesterday, and it is slowly trees are growing, and the nature is taking over to the whole space. There were no trees on the site when we started this project. And I'm going to show now a few photographs of the school, although I feel that this project needs to be experienced in person. This photograph does not give a very clear understanding of the experience of the place itself, but I'm also going to show some speculations which might also help understand how students would experience the space. So I'm just going to describe one photograph, and then I'll go quickly to others. So this is the entrance to the school. There are a lot of birds on this part of the site. There are a lot of and the floor, which is Kota stone, which is rough, slopes towards the entrance, which is painted in yellow. The wall texture is sand-faced, so it demarks that it's an outside space. There's a bush tree that also we thought, and it's an aromatic tree that we thought that it could be a marker of the entry. This is a speculation image where students with cortical cerebral visual impairment, called CVI, would perceive this same space. CVI is a brain-based visual impairment, leading cause for visual impairment in children. And person with CVI, their lived experiences were very different. So some experience world as a swirl of mass of motion, color, and light, and some can focus but struggle to understand what they see. This is the entrance corridor which I mentioned, which has a tall volume and a width. Here there is a very different sound echo it creates. Light as a focal point that also creates a contrasting surface, which also helps students to create an entrance to the classroom. The wall texture on the right has vertical grains, so it demarcates that you are on a shorter side, and on the other side is a smooth texture of the classroom. This is a speculation image where the same space children with blindness with light perception would experience. All one can perceive is light or dark, the absence or presence of light in a room or in a space. One does not perceive shapes, shadows, harsh light, or soft light. This is the east corridor. Again, we used color as a focal, light and color as a focal point. Here, while moving through this corridor, landscape also plays an important role. So aromatic plants like jasmine and damro and parijat gives a very different sort of an experience when you move. But children with CVI would experience something like this. They have children with CVI have trouble with the visual clutter. When there are too many things in an environment, it's very difficult for the students. And light itself is counted as clutter in many cases. Children uses color for visual attention and object recognition. So we try to use as less as different materialities or surfaces or colors. We wanted to be very strategic and clear about the movement. This is a west corridor, and this is how the children would experience. And sometimes light is a very challenging subject for this, because children with CVI might be impacted so much with the light that it is just a visual target, other children might benefit with the lighted objects. So this was a constant discussion on about what kind of optimum environment we create for the classroom. So this is a classroom which opens to the courtyard. As I was mentioning, that the light is diffused light from the courtyard. We also created these perforated doors with 2 mm of holes. So again, our summers are very harsh in Gandhinagar. So if there is high intensity, the doors could be closed, and the intensity of the light could be controlled and be used. And the children with low vision would experience the same space like this. Natural light could either be beneficial or harmful for the students with low vision. For some, sunlight can be helpful when reading a book or writing. For those who are sensitive to light, the brightness can cause glare or pain. Appropriate natural as well as artificial light is very important for users and conditions. And this is a speculation image where the doors are closed. What would be the experience? This is a photograph of another classroom. We also used contrasting colors for the furniture, and this furniture was existing. We painted it in different colors. And also the light, the switchboards in the photograph, we also created this black and white contrasting fixtures, so students with low vision could also identify it easily. We also the doors were painted with black frame so that the students with the low vision could get a sense about the entrance of that space. So these are some of the photographs of the courtyard, the central gathering space, and children, they are very good in music. So sometimes there are musical events, they are gathering in this courtyard, and it's a very pleasant space to be in. Communication was something which was very important for us in this project. Initially, we started with this communication with cardboard models with teachers and students, but they had difficulty understanding the interior spaces. So we devised the code of 3D printed textures, which we overlapped onto the plans, and we tried to create the tactile drawing. There were a lot of trial and errors we did with the students to make sure if they understand the spaces that we were trying to create. And also we understood that students are very scared of cardboard models that they might break. So we also made these 3D printed models with furniture embedded. So every detail could, students and teachers could understand how their classroom might be. And this is the latest drawing that we made. We also were trying out different contrasting patterns and colors for students with low vision. These are some of the sample drawings that we created for students with low vision. Of course, these are still work in progress, and this needs more studies and research. But we were trying out if this could be helpful in the communication process. We also made these board models where students could experience the periphery of the location of the new building in reference to the hostel block, as well as 1:1 line out, so that students can really walk and gauge how long or short is the building. The second project that I'm going to share is
Anand, we've 10 more minutes, so I'm just giving you a heads up. Thank you.
Thank you. So the second project I'm going to share is the community housing at Vastral. In 2018, we were invited by Manav Sadhana and De Montfort University to design housing for a community of people who were affected with leprosy disease and flood every monsoon. Throughout history, there was a stigma around this disease. People with leprosy were marginalized, treated as outcasts, and were forced to live in dedicated asylums away from the society. Many people affected with leprosy migrated from different parts of the country and settled in Ahmedabad. The community we are working with is the largest in Ahmedabad, with just 125 homes and more than 500 people living in dilapidated conditions. So this was the condition during the monsoons in 2018. The houses get flooded from 30 to 45 centimeters. And the reason was that the site was in a low-lying area. The road is much higher, it is 1.8 meter higher. And earlier it was surrounded by farmlands, but now due to the newer development and surrounding compound walls, this whole community has become like a saucer. So this is the plan, and the major housing is here, and the slope goes towards this side, and there is a huge compound wall which has been developed, and it doesn't let rainwater to go away. Just to give a sense, the community is located in Vastral, which was in 1968 was an outskirts. Now it has become the part of the Ahmedabad city. So people from the community identified 55 houses which needed immediate rehabilitation. So with the lottery, we have built 13 homes in the community, step by step, assessing, learning, and improving from each one. Each home has been designed uniquely with rigorous engagement and dialogue with the end users, understanding the aspiration, number of family members, and occupation. So these are the houses that we have constructed, but I'm just going to show two to give a sense about the project. Some of the design concerns were houses need to be flood resilient. It should have natural light and ventilation, should be incremental. We need to engage contractors, fabricators from the community itself, and build the house with a budget of 4 lakh rupees. So the first house that I'm going to share is of Narsama and the family. She's a widow living with 2 children. So this was the house with 1 room with no natural light and ventilation, house with asbestos roof. And in the section, you can see how the levels were and how it was flooding. So first thing what we did was we demolished the existing house, and with the debris of the existing house, we built a higher plinth of 90 centimeters. We built a small room where she can sleep, and a cooking area and a courtyard. And we built the foundations in a way, we invested a lot of money on the foundation in a way that it could be built 1 story above. So the layout is very simple. It has a courtyard in the front, a living space, a courtyard in the rear, with a kitchen opening to the courtyard. Most of the materials of this house have been reused from the old house, like we reused the debris for plinth, we used bricks from the old house as much as we can. Doors, as you see here, are from the old house. Even the stone and every material possible, we will try to reuse. Even the floor tiles are made from the waste marble dust, and people from the community made. This is the courtyard, and this is the kitchen, is a story which I'll share. And this was the condition before and after the houses were built. And this was during the monsoon. Also, skill development workshop, we also organized 3 with help of different professionals. So Professor Jay Shukla and Ravi Umbrania conducted tile making workshop from waste marble dust. We also invited Mika students for paper mesh workshop, and we also invited Arjun Doshi for ferrocement workshop. So I'm not going to go into much detail of it, but these are some of the sample tiles, and where people from the community also learned, and together we used some of the learnings in making of the houses. Another thing that I wanted to share is change in communication technique. That contractor that we were working could not read architectural drawings or working drawings. So we made these models with dimension, which help ease the communication. This was a great learning experience as architects, that that we have to work with all kind of contractors, and how can we communicate in much easier way. This is the drawing of door that we gave it to a fabricator, and he said that he knows how to read drawings, and these dotted lines are the swing lines, and he thought it was structural member, and he built it like that. And I was very upset initially that it was a mistake, but then I understood that we have to change our own methods of communication and how simple we can communicate. And this mistake we repeated everywhere, and it became like a characteristic of the doors. And each design was debated and discussed in the community, and these are some of the photographs. We also, for the ease of communication, we also photographed the belongings of the households, and we showed. The second house that I'm going to quickly show is house for Aruna. The condition of the house was like this. It was below 30 centimeters from the street level, which was 1.8 meters below the road level. And there were 8 members living in the house in an area of 4 meters by 6 meters without any toilets. So our first step was to build a 2-story structure, but create like an open space in front of the street, because we also didn't want to change the scale of the street. We built a ferrocement roof, staircase, and loft where children can sleep. And when the neighbor also expands in the same way, then the characteristic of street also changes. So these are some of the photographs of the construction. Arjun was very generous that he came and taught us this technique, and we were able to build this house with his help. This is the loft, and this is the staircase made from ferrocement. To be very honest, the grandmother of the house didn't like this house at all, because she related this house with train, because the roof was curved, and she related these doors with industrial sheds. So these are some photographs of the other houses that we had built. I'm not going to go into the detail of this. I just wanted to show around so that one can understand that each house has been thought according to the needs of the family and the size of the family. I want to end this presentation with this quote from Naguib Mahfouz for the housing project. Home is not where you are born. Home is where all your attempts to escape cease. And I wish that people of this community feel as their home. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that nothing can be done alone. And these are the people who are involved in making of these projects. Thank you very much for listening patiently.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you for a very fascinating talk. Lots to discuss. So thank you for sharing the work. And with that, I'm going to ask Varna to share her screen and start, and then we'll convene for the discussion. Thank you again. Varna, you on?
Yes. Good evening to the audience in South Asia, and good morning to those in America. Thank you, Professor Rahul Mehrotra and Pranav and the members of the GST South Asia team and Mittal Institute for the privilege of being invited to be a part of the series of presentations and the opportunity to share my work with an audience, especially those from my school, the GST. I'm also grateful for the chance to present alongside Anand, whose presentation and work is so thoughtful and sensitive. I think the premise of my presentation today is really based on landscape, sort of the atmospheric component to landscape in South Asia. I've structured my presentation into approach and projects, collective landscape, and ongoing work. I work from Bangalore. I run a very small landscape practice based in Bengaluru, doing few projects around the Indian subcontinent. My team is extremely small. It's me, usually with 2 or 3 team members, working from a small garage practice in South Bangalore. I started my professional practice in the veranda practice of the Sri Lankan architect Anjalendran C in Colombo. My internship time with architect Anjalendran in Colombo was an incredible insight into philosophy, literature, history, archaeology, classical music, but more than everything, sort of understanding the importance of recognizing and knowing one's own context. Working in Sri Lanka also exposed me to cultural landscapes and sort of an appreciation for my own cultural landscapes that exist back in India. These are some of the influences, the everyday ordinary, that I would like to highlight in my landscape. Basically, India filled with encounters with everyday ordinary, and sort of revealing the layers to sort of expose it in the work that I undertake. My journey into landscape architecture as a student at GST was extremely influential, being mentored by teachers such as Margie Ruddick, Gary Hildebrand, ecologists like Richard Foreman, and all of this, I think, has shaped my way of thinking. The first project and the challenges that I encountered when I came back to India after working briefly in the US was really recognizing that landscape architecture was followed a very conventional mode of practice still in the country. It was driven by commerce largely, it's client driven, it's mostly architect driven. And to find the space where you can undertake projects which sort of allow you to explore the public realm, to serve larger communities of people, sort of involved creative ways of thinking. My first project actually came from doing a competition project for in collaboration with Karen's and ESTEC in Bangalore, and working on looking at the master plan for Bangalore Club. Out of this emerged a project where I was contacted by Kavita Sabharwal, also an alum of Harvard, while she was designing her campus, Neve Academy. While landscapes in India are atmospheric, they actually touch the chitta or the soul, the reality of urban landscape and space that landscape architects sort of encounter every day based on densities and property prices are this. So these were the remnants, or this is the space that we encountered in the design of Neve Academy, a school that is situated in Bellandur in Yamalur. So it was located on a 0.5 acre, very, very small site. And this was a primary school designed by 100 Hands Architects. And the amount of open space that was left as a part of the landscape, or the landscape to be a part of, was actually very, very limited. So the idea was to really look at education in the sense of creating a series of micro environments that the children would encounter, really looking at these spaces, which is a series of grittiness, infrastructure, rather than experience with nature or experience with anything more profound. So these were the setbacks, these were the open slivers that were a part of the design. And the idea very quickly was to really create these environments that the children would encounter. This was an aquatic environment. There were 4 or 5 different environments based on what they observed on a daily basis. So this was an aquatic court, which provided also an entry into the school, a very shallow depth of water, and really looking at creating an aquatic environment, which would also form a didactic space for the children. So there were the ideas of actually creating a dry stream bed that worked with ideas of physics, and children would really look at the space and sort of encounter the space as a landscape of engagement. It would also teach them physics in terms of fluidics and sort of different mechanics of dealing with water, whether it was a rotating wheel. And the sheer complexity of dealing with constructing my first landscape in a very, very tight environment, really looking at, working with craftsmen, working with local material, in this case, Chapadi or gneiss rock, and really creating this environment which would actually operate when the children operated a hand pump. It would teach them about this ephemeral qualities of landscape, but also would be very much a teaching tool. So the challenges in this project was, how do you really negotiate bringing in 100-ton blocks of stone? How do you deal with the kind of timelines that India encounters? It was a project which had to be built in 3 months, and really looking at negotiating the logistics as a first project, while at the same time creating a didactic and ephemeral environment for the children. So this is briefly how the children sort of encounter these landscapes. There's also a desert courtyard. There are courtyards that take you through an edible garden and various environment which becomes part of their syllabi, and also on a daily basis, something that they encounter, learn from, and sort of really connect with. So the whole school works on the idea of permaculture. And although it is a very, very tight environment, the children have the opportunity to partake of and really encounter the landscape. The second project that I would like to share with you is actually a public project, Bangalore International Center. It's located in a very, very dense environment. It's actually located in Domlur. It's a remediation landscape. The site is just about an acre. It's surrounded by derelict open space and army grounds on one side. The sheer density of the neighborhood is actually something to encounter, but also given this, the noise factors, it's 80 decibels of noise. And also, so really the other main thing was the fact that it adjoined a nala, a very polluted nala, and degraded soils on site. So these were things that were very pressing. And basically the nala is highly polluted. There is a discharge of raw waste. Additionally, during the summers, the waste stagnates, creating unsightly flotsam with foul odor and mosquitoes near the institution. So the key idea was really looking at improving this space and providing an amenity to the visitors and residents of this neighborhood, and mitigating any further pollution to the nala. So the entire institution is a vibrant public institution. It is an institution for cross-cultural dialogues. It's across religions, regions, and societies. The space is visited by hundreds of people every year. So what was actually, really very, very narrow space, because the programmatic built requirements within this project was extremely huge. It included a 185-seater auditorium, seminar halls, cafes, and galleries, leaving very little room for landscape. So the idea over here was to really look at the notion of borrowed landscape, really look at the creation of riparian corridors and creating a very public Nala corridor. So in this case, with very, very low depths of water, the idea was to create a biological pond that would then connect into the neighboring derelict park landscape, really providing an expanded sense of the environment for the people. It was also used as a mechanism to really block out the neighboring noises and the traffic sounds. The entire landscape towards the entry is really looked at as a linear corridor that connects with the building and sort of scales down the building, really creating a whimsical front to the building, but also acts as a biodiverse pollinator garden. So these spaces really become pause spaces during performances. It's also a space for installation. It's also a space for people to congregate. So instead of creating one large, wide open green space. The idea was to really scale down and negotiate and provide an additional layer of screening and sort of a microclimatic component to the entire building. This entire stretch is actually a pollinator garden. It attracts several species of urban pollinators. And the entire corridor towards the Nala has been really designed as a rain garden. It's a linear greenway, which is extremely biodiverse. It has a high density of planting. It also has local chapadi, which has been dry laid along with crushed gravel. The idea was to really create a very, very dense planting palette using native and adapted species. About 78 to 80 native species of planting have been used, and local species and species that actually filter water, cleanse the soil. These have been the species that have been used, apart from really creating a very, very textural greenway that acts as a pause point and a respite for the people in the neighborhood to connect with, and really converting the notion of really degraded corridor into a space that becomes a neighborhood amenity. So the planting density has been kept very high. This is to enable the filtration of the water really to go through the gravel beds and really cleanse the water before it is actually collected. This is to prevent any discharge into the Nala. But the Indian scenario is such that public land and sort of a Nala corridor becomes a space which deals with ownership issues. As much as we would have liked to intervene with the Nala space and really look at a larger systemic cleansing and sort of connection of this public landscape, it becomes a very, very difficult point to sort of intervene. So the idea here was to really look at this corridor to connect to the army grounds on one side and the derelict open space to really create a stroll or a meander way. And also over time, it has become extremely biodiverse. There are various kinds of planting, fragrant, textural, a lot of Indian Ayurvedic herbs have been used, so really creating a diverse, textured landscape, even at smaller scales, using Brahmi, using Tulasi, using everyday plants that people encounter but really do not pay attention to, but become really, really useful within this landscape. Salvias, and it's a mix of planting, very textural, and something that the people can escape from being within the center of the city. The project that I want to move on to now is once again projects that really challenge ideas of what a landscape architect can do. And also, although India is really about extremely evocative cultural landscapes, the everyday reality is dense conditions like this. Big Brewski is a project that I worked on with Soumitra Ghosh, architect Soumitra Ghosh, and it was a collaboration with him. Big Brewski is one in India's largest microbrewery, but the idea over here was being located in this extremely dense urban condition, large high-rise buildings, and looking at the density of it, and very, very close to the airport and the highway condition. The challenge also was the very fact that it had a lot of infrastructure. Basically, everything was on slab. And as you can see, what you see beneath is brewing equipment. It's large-scale brewing equipment and really no access to soils. So everything was on concrete slabs. And as you can see, the idea behind the architecture was really to treat this as a ruin, a ruin that over time develops a landscape layer, a landscape that is also about decay. It's also therefore about growth. And as a building decays, the landscape component sort of then emerges and then takes over this. Very much drawn in from the Indian cultural landscapes of either abandoned stepped wells, abandoned water collection ponds, and but the actualities of it was that it was a very challenging project. As you can see, everything is on slab. There is no room for any direct contact to soil. So the idea was to be very creative about how can vegetation or how can this component of growth really then emerge and take over this condition. There were very few trees that existed on site. These were the existing site trees. And looking at how the plan really functions, the overall idea was there was a large scale, massive flowing body of water, a rapid in the center, and the brewery surrounded this water body. So these were the existing trees, and there was hardly any room, as I've mentioned, to incorporate planting. So at the upper level, the idea was to really create moments where the sort of landscape intervenes in ways, and to really look at how vegetation can really function in this very harsh, urban, gritty condition. There were different ways we've looked at. We've really approached this literally as creating zones of planting, looking at walls, looking at water, looking at edge condition, aquatic zones and vegetated walls, and really overall creating different pockets, crevices, and surfaces to actually create another ecosystem that works at a very micro level. So these were some of the plant species, and that was used. Water became a massive component of creating an ecosystem, really looking at submerged, emergent vegetation within this area. And as you can see, really looking at the surface and really looking at the boundaries and peripheries to actually incorporate vegetation. The idea here also was to use very local plant palettes that people really do not think important choruses. There were about 78 to 80 species of plants. A lot of them Ayurvedic forageable plants that could also be used in the drinks. And really, river grasses and planting planting that would actually grow very quickly, would occupy less space, but also had a very sensorial component to this. These are some ideas of, how the planting could actually occupy space, crevices, ledges, and then really looking at the components of the build and sort of really creating another layer, which actually is totally underwater, and really looking at underwater becoming a part of this entire experience as people use this space. So this is an extremely used space. It had heavy footfalls of about 2,000 people at any time. And really the building sort of vanishing into this landscape of edible, medicinal, Ayurvedic plants, and sort of your daily encounter with this other zone, which is underwater and sort of in between the ledges and crevices, sort of using plants and sort of the habitat and creation of these microhabitat, be it marsh gliders, be it the birds, and opportunities to encounter these despite being in a very peopled I move on to some ideas that we have always worked on. The idea of how do you create collective landscapes given India's context of not really having too many opportunities to intervene, fewer projects, fewer opportunities to intervene in the public realm. The idea was to really create a collective which will encourage people, encourage designers, non-designers to come together to shape open spaces. It started with one of the projects that one of the competitions that we took part in, which was the Hyderabad Metro Rail competition, and it was a competition which we did not win, but it was an exercise to really look at a 1.5 kilometer stretch median in Hyderabad in the Mettugoda Tarnaka area. However, the way we saw this was really looking at the 72 kilometer stretch of the metro median corridor, which would then, we thought, presented an extraordinary opportunity. So the design process really proposed an ecological strand for the city that would look at the Hyderabad's really rich geological and cultural history. The idea was to create a green corridor or a connective tissue for the city of Hyderabad that is absolutely reminiscent of the geological history and the ecological history. So the strand would follow, basically we did these studies that looked at networks, and then the strand would follow basically the entire metro median corridor. It would act as a riparian for urban birds, small mammals, and butterflies, and also an ecological and didactic experience. So we were looking at these gardens of infrastructure where you could glimpse, where you could pause, where you would move fast, and ways in which to encounter it. So, we had a series of various smaller gardens. Basically at micro scale, we looked at the 1.5 kilometer median stretch as a series of rain gardens, rock gardens, seasonal gardens, and urban scrub jungle. So these were some of the experiences, and looking at the overall stretch and sort of connecting back to the cultural and sort of geological history of the region, trying to keep it very drought and tolerant, and sort of really making use of infrastructure as a moment to experience beauty. Some of the other projects we've been involved in is a small park project. It's a 0.2 acre park, and sort of really negotiating with the corporators, working with low budgets, involving the children in the city to work on this. We're also involved in working on pro bono projects such as Kumar. All of these are a part of the Open Space Collective. And also village ponds that were self-built by the villagers in Bengal Kuppa, Andhra Pradesh. And on a larger scale, ideas of ecology and really looking at lagoon environments and sort of cultural landscapes and impacting the way we build, the way we conserve, and the way we treat architecture in correlation. The project that I would like to end with is an ongoing project, which is the APF Foundation schools located in Rajasthan, in Barmer, Sirohi, and Tonk. Basically, I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with Flying Elephant Architects, and we're working on 3 sites in Rajasthan, along with renowned environmentalist and rewilding expert Pradeep Kishan. These are located in Barmer, Sirohi, and Tonk. So these are the 3 sites. Basically, I really admire the philosophy of APF Foundation in uplifting education in India through uplifting schools and government schools, especially around India. So basically, these are the 3 sites. And what is very different about them is really studying them and sort of understanding moisture regimes, soils, the terrain. And Tonk happens to be a wetter site very close to Jaipur. Sirohi is more alkaline, and Barmer is within the dune landscape. So really looking at studying the vegetation that exists, Rajasthan's beautiful vegetation of ruis and senior landscapes. And, I would like to take us through one of the schools that we are working on, which is basically in Tonk. So the idea behind this school is to really look at creating a landscape that is actually about creating biodiversity for the Chinkaras, also creating many moments where we collect water. We take the children through experiencing a larger landscape that is about experiencing scrublands and Chinkara habitat, and also about wildflower meadows and meadans and smaller level landscapes. So this has been the thought process. The idea was to really look at the school connecting to this, 7-acre large, wide, sort of long stretch of land where there exists 2 mud buildings, which we are adaptively reusing as a nursery on site, to create moments where the children can actually encounter and experience various types of vegetation, scrublands, and as they walk through, wildflower meadows and grasslands, and encountering spaces and moments even at a micro level. The idea is to also look at collection of water, treatment of water, and for all of this to actually become a didactic and an ecological amenity for the children. So these are some of the spaces that we're creating, and with careful study of the vegetation and really moments which will take them through traverse various landscapes. The ideas of outdoor classrooms through learning circles, and the language of the landscape derived from language of the vernacular in Rajasthan and what they encounter. These are moments where it's actually the school common that opens out into the wetland and wildflower meadows. And the vocabulary for all of this being derived from the land, be it Richard Long's experiments in Rajasthan, and that came from all of the low walls that people encounter and become a part of creating and defining landscape in the vernacular homes. So really looking at a series of spaces such as these, which take them through through walkways where they encounter bird blinds and the vegetation, wildflower meadows, and a series of studies into the kind of grasses that grow in, and basically formulation of this and precedence, even with the design of playgrounds, looking at nearby astronomical wonders, basically the Jantar Mantar, and sort of how this idea of drawing from that and creating this playscape, which has the background of the Aravalis and sort of responds to this environment, and sort of really creating a language of the landscape that is about the people, that is about the land, that is about the vegetation, what is available. And basically we're working on another school in Sirohi where we really would like for the courtyards to really connect, create these moments which really connect with the larger landscape, but is also very much rooted to the place, whether it's vegetation or people.
Thank you very much, Varna. If you can stop sharing your screen, then we can start the discussion. Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so we can go ahead, right, Pranav? Yeah, okay. Thanks to both of you for fascinating presentation. This was really very exciting. I'm thrilled that this is building the way it is, because I think we are all, as an audience and a community, being exposed to new things, new thinking, a whole generation. So fantastic. I'm just going to make a few comments, just my own impressions, Varna and Anand, and then a couple of questions, and we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Varna, I think, that image of the veranda of Anjalendran's house, of course, was very nostalgic for me. And I think I firsthand also felt many things you were describing about the context. So that was deep nostalgia. But I was, struck by a few things which clearly are beginning to define your values and your practice, which are very interesting. And, I think your background, having studied at the GSD, something that I'm a bit familiar with, and the shift that has occurred even here, maybe over 2 decades, where the emphasis of, focusing on plant materials has moved into kind of broader concerns of the landscape as ecology, the landscape as, situated in a territory, and it's more kind of expansive ecological definition. It's just wonderful to see how your projects, whether they are at the level of the school or as they ramp up in scale, they are really, I think in both your works, beauty is a given. They're very beautiful. But I think what's fascinating and what's important, I think for us as a community, is how it goes beyond that beauty. And so your landscapes are about teaching, they're about performing, they're about cutting out sound, they're about cleaning the water. So they have dimensions that build on various aspects of the context. And I think you highlighted how your understanding and your sensitivity to the context is very critical. The other thing, of course, I was struck with was your reference to temporality and time. And really, temporality in landscape architecture plays itself out more than any other sub-discipline within the building environment, because temporality is, life. And therefore, with plant material, it is life. And acknowledging it and creating the synergies between communities, people, architecture, and the landscape, I think comes out very, very clearly, and something we look forward to seeing you build on. I was also struck with the word crevice. You use crevice a lot, including, which is actually, it's a wonderful metaphor in a sense, because often, and I say this carefully, just in a productive way, and I'd like to pick this up in the questions, is often landscape architects come too late into the process. And so therefore, in a way, I read the use of the word crevice as almost a metaphor, that I come in and now I have to find the crevices to create a kind of equal equation with the built environment. So that was a wonderful info. I read it metaphorically. Maybe you didn't intend it like that, but I think it's quite, it's very beautiful. In any case, I mean, I think it was a wonderful scalar, an expansive scalar kind of a display of the things you've been doing, which raise a lot of questions. So I hope, raise a lot of interesting questions. So I hope we will have some discussion. Anand, I think, again, like I said, beauty was something that was fundamental in, I think, what you achieved. But I mean, I like the way you defined the frugal, slowly beauty. And I think what the Blind School, but the other projects also force us to think about is different parameters and considerations when we imagine architecture, right? I mean, I think the Blind School, you could have picked up the problem quite differently, but I think what's really commendable is the way you picked up the problem through imagining the lived experience of the user. In this case, the user having the challenges that you very beautifully describe, and the provocative drawings of trying to speculate and imagine what they might see in terms of perhaps creating feedback loops for the future could also, I think, be really fascinating as your sort of work, goes on. And I think I was also struck by the way you started by framing this as saying that in the legacy of Ahmedabad, while it's inspiration, it also becomes a limitation, is how do you place your own work within those various traditions and what you pick up from. And of course, I think as generations go on, that becomes a challenge. So let me just sort of, before we go to the audience and their questions there, I want to kind of pose a couple of questions to you both. Let me actually start with you, Anand, which is that I think what was striking about your work was that you have very different clients. You have institutions, you have the Gandhi Ashram, which is, yes, an institution, but it's more than that. It's a foundation. There's a legacy of Gandhi. The school is a lot of your projects, including the leprosy, the home for the housing that you showed us, has multiple partners. It's NGOs with De Montfort University. We saw students from the university working and helping you. So therefore, the constituencies you are bringing together, both within an institutional structure, but also the users, sometimes often not very empowered, is challenging. So my question really to you, the first one is, how do these formulations occur for young people listening to this conversation? Are these things you went out of your way and cobbled together? Were you blessed and lucky that De Montfort University came to you and said, this is a project we are doing, we'd like you to be the architect? How did these formulations come about? And these could be very personal stories, but I mean, I think they're very important for these conversations with new practitioners, that we demystify these processes, because the demystification gives us the confidence to engage with them and therefore come up with beautiful work like you are.
Sure. So I can give a little bit of background on how this project started. So I worked at Sangat for almost 4.5 years, and then I wanted to take a break, and that's where I landed up at Gandhi Ashram in Manav Sadhana. It's an NGO, and with not an intention to do anything to architecture, because I really wanted to take a break, but I was again drawn to it somehow, fortunately or unfortunately. But I think that's where everything started, where this NGO gave me an opportunity. I'm an outsider and without no context here in Ahmedabad, and with no experience of building, and I think it is the risk they took, and something that started this long partnership, where we started with these volunteer houses, and then from that volunteer houses, someone from Assam saw the project and they invited us to do Jai Jagat Theatre and the Blind School project, and also this NGO, I think, also has been working at many communities. So also De Montfort University also was engaged, because they were working on several other issues in education and health and other aspects within the community. So the community housing in Vastral was Manav Sadhana, and they have been working there since 2 decades. And the problem of flooding was very evident, and they have been looking for partnership where funding could be available. And that's where De Montfort University also came in. They saw this problem and they thought that we should do something about it. And it was an architecture department who really came. And that's how everything was formulated. So it was, I think, coincidental, to be very honest, but I felt that it was such an important partnership. I never imagined, because what a professional architect, an NGO, and a university, along with the students, can contribute so much and learn so much from each other, and do something on the ground. And also the School of Architecture where I studied, as I was saying, that Professor Shukla, and they all came I saw that they were working, and I invited them, and they came and taught us all the aspects, because of the limitations with the money, about the expertise, and I think it was everyone's contribution. And also I feel that academics and practice should somehow interrelate, and except also I try to conduct studios which are of actual programs, and in the loving community, and at Rajkot also I used to do the same. So yeah,
No, that's very interesting. And I mean, I think these are all beginnings of conversations. So we're not looking for any final. I mean, I think the idea is to trigger off thoughts that we can all reflect on. And I think what comes out from your response is very interesting, because it's also, it points to not only different kinds of constituencies and clients, but also how academia can begin to connect, and this sort of partnership. And it's a good model where the learnings, whether it's building technologies or whether it's ways of approaching housing and structures, I mean, all the moves you made there were subtle, but yet very nuanced and very beautifully articulated. And so I think it's something that we should think about and maybe continue to explore in this forum, is this connection of the academy and profession, and what model of practice that might also give us. My second question to you, and then I'll move to Varna, is a little more, again, difficult, but not difficult, but in the spirit, again, of thinking and reflecting about this. You know, you raised the question of the legacies in Ahmedabad, you know, not only Cobb and Khan, but Correa and Doshi and many other architects. And therefore, how do you situate yourself into this, right? But then when I look at your work, I think you bring another whole kind of legacy into it, which is Alvaro Siza and the minimalism and the white buildings. And, you know, it's a completely, it's a different aesthetic, which resonates with, of course, the rich legacy of modernism in Ahmedabad, but also brings a kind of, it brings a translated and transformed, I mean, very positively, I'm saying this very positively, aesthetic sensibility that comes from the minimalism, minimalism, but also the voluptuous sculptural quality of Siza, right? So, and then I see these white buildings and they actually sit very beautifully in the landscape. They're very beautifully articulated. They're internalized in terms of light. And so they feel very, very much part of the place. So don't get me wrong in my comment. And I'm saying this in very positive ways. But it also makes me think, well, I mean, at a pragmatic level, it makes me think about weathering. So Anand is going to go back and whitewash these buildings after every monsoon. Maybe that's a good thing. But I just wonder if you reflected about this aesthetic question. And again, you don't have to answer this. I'm trying to start conversations among all of us. That's all.
No, I think it's a valid question. And so to be honest, my first 2-3 buildings were stone buildings. They were exposed stone buildings, and I never thought of using white. And I think the white came because I think in Gandhi Ashram I was working and I was looking at the houses which were built in ashram. Hriday Kunj itself, it is whitewashed with dark terracotta, Charles Correa's brick and white louvers. So I don't know, maybe subconsciously I took that decision, probably that this is an appropriate color for that. I didn't start with an idea that wanted to do a white building. But also I felt that once it was built, reflecting on it, I think it also formed like a backdrop because the greens and the sky and everything came into. And sorry.
In fact, if your Gandhi Ashram project wasn't white, I won't ask you the question, because for the blind school, it just works so beautifully. And so anyway, no, this is just to reflect about. Yeah. Now, before I go to Varna, I just want to, one of our advisors on this project, we have a whole board of advisors on this larger project, which I will announce at the next meeting. But one of them happens to be C. Anjalendran Varna, who has been intently watching your presentation, and he just extends in the question chat saying, Varna, your projects are exciting, congratulations. And Anjalendran also reaches out to you, Anand, and he says your work with the blind and flooding is exemplary, congratulations. So I just wanted to intervene with that before I go to Varna. So Varna, I think, the question I had for you was simple. I've already kind of alluded to it. I've sort of described what resonated with me. I think it's fascinating to see. I think it's good for the GSD. I'm glad this is a GSD platform, because I think the GSD should be proud of what you took from here and translated in real terms in a context of South Asia, because you have worked both in Sri Lanka and in India and continue to engage with South Asia in many, many ways. I want to ask you this question. And again, these are all intended as reflections. So it's not a question even. Is, what I said about the crevices, that was a wonderful metaphor for me. And this always has been a question, what comes first, the landscape or architecture? So I see the Bangalore International Center, which I know was a competition. It was a tight site. I've had the pleasure of walking that site myself with the architects and all of that. But what you did was you made the most of a setback in the building, correct? You took the setback of the building and you transformed it into a landscape with as much presence as the building in some ways. And I mean that again, very positively. In other places, you've had the expansiveness of doing things, right? So as a young practitioner, And having now worked there for a decade or whatever that time might be, how do you reflect about how we can flatten a little more these relationships, especially when we bring landscape in with a performative dimension? How do we flatten these within the culture of the profession in South Asia, where it's almost like the landscape architect being approached simultaneously with the architect. Often the architect is asked to appoint a landscape architect, right? We should be getting landscape architects being asked to appoint an architect by the client. Could we reach that moment? And how might we? And maybe it is a matter of actually articulating the agency that landscape has in terms of the performative dimensions that you've so maybe you should be playing that up as a profession. And I know, because I want to make this acknowledgement, that the first time we really interacted like this was in the Leaf Foundation seminar, which Aniket Bhagwat put together, which was on landscape, which was just a very educative and expansive set of discussions, which I really learned a lot from and admire the way he did that. And it became evident to me that there are some voices that are emerging strongly about these performative dimensions. And so I just wonder if you've reflected on it and what you think.
Thank you, Professor Rahul. I think it's a very valid observation. And I think it's been very challenging being a young practice and sort of looking at really architecture being the protagonist and sort of driving the design profession and sort of driving clients' value. But I really feel that it's more conversations, more interdisciplinary conversations, and sort of really collaborations and connections that can be made where, you know, clients too, if they could participate in this and sort of see value in why bringing someone on board exists, would really actually make a difference. And you're right, maybe the way you've looked at crevice being a metaphor is very interesting, and maybe I would deal with lesser crevices, and the expression of my landscape perhaps would change if given the opportunity. But I still feel it's mostly sort of understanding and sort of looking at landscape as a profession that is also intellectual, not just aesthetic, and just the aesthetic being a component that becomes something that is derived from the site, and how we deal with it may improve things. I don't know.
No, I mean, just another way to pose the question, and I'll stop at that, is, should a given site, should the landscape be imagined first and then architecture put in the crevices? Because if landscape has to be performative, or we do the business as usual, which is architecture occupies the site and then landscape goes in the crevices. So just something to think about, which is, I think, interesting. So with that, Pranav, I'm going to give you the first option to ask the question. Otherwise, I'll go to the chat and ask questions from that, or you might pick up questions from the chat.
I think I'll begin with a question from the chat and add on to that. It's a question by Asim Noon. Fantastic projects. What advice would you give architects or welfare workers to engage with communities reflectively? How do we as outsiders best interact with and understand the needs of others? I think bouncing on that question, I think both your presentations were fantastic, and the sensitivity of dealing with the context came across very strongly. What I'm curious about, Anand, in your presentation is, what is the process of community engagement in both the projects, and at what points in the process does that come in? Because as I understand, it is very crucial in the design process. And I think similar with Varna, as at what points do you engage with the context beyond the physical environments, and where does that come into your practice?
You want to
go ahead, Anand, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Pranav, for this question. I can share experience for the housing project. So we have been working on that project since the last 4 years. So I think this relationship took time to build initially. so visiting the location more often and talking to people, I think it was something to start developing the conversation was important rather than anything, listening and engaging on the ground. For the first two houses, to be very honest, the process was not very communicative, because I think because we were new on the ground, and because the houses were getting built, so people, when I showed the model and everything, they accepted as it is, and they did not participate a lot. But when these two houses were built, I started seeing that many things were not working, like storage and like small things in the house that were not working for the users. And that's where we started talking that why it was not being communicated. And that's where we understood that the drawings, the models that we showed didn't make sense to them, and they were reluctant to ask further questions. So that's when we started changing the method of making models. We started taking pictures of the houses and putting the belongings into the models. So that's where I think the dialogue started. And after 2 or 3 more houses, I think there was a sort of a confidence, and there was a lot of critique in the community meetings. And I think this relationship was built over the period of time, and not from the first day. So the last house that we made, now they tell me very confidently that they don't want these things in the house, or they want this. So then I listen and try to translate in my own understanding. So I think engaging more on the ground, I think, might help. That's what my experience was.
Anand, just while you're on that line, there's a question from Sampreet Rao, where, this question of the association to industrial material, you said the grandmother rejected it. What are your reflections on that? Because your doors were also metal.
Yes. So the house that we built of 2 floors, so 4 lakh rupees was a very strict budget, and more than, if it goes beyond 4 lakh rupees, then the condition from the NGO and the university, I think it was that then people will have to pay for the house. And that's where the ferro cement and other material came into being, because RCC was not feasible to create 2 slabs. And the doors and the metal doors were a very simple solution, because there was a fabricator in the community. Most of the doors in the house, in the community, were metal doors, and it was but the mistake that I made was creating like large doors, and my intention was to open the cooking area to the courtyard where she works, to create like because it is such a small space, so I thought that it will expand. And that's where she associated with because there's a lot of industrial metal factories around the neighborhood, and they see big doors as like the connection with that. And the roof, as I was mentioning, that in trains there are these bunk beds with this curved roof, so they're associated with that. So she always, whenever I go to the site, she criticized that you made like a disaster for the house. But the other family members liked it. But this was something that I was surprised that how associations are for the houses.
Thank you. Pranav, you want to?
I think I'll read out a question from the chat. This is regarding the fee structure and the economic structures. I think in summary, since both of your practices do work with projects that are smaller in area and with very small budgets, how does that work out with your practice, and how does that work out in managing your firm structures?
For both people.
Yes.
Varna, you can go ahead first this time if you want.
Okay. So I think my practice is really tiny. It's very site-based, and I work with 1 or 2 people at most, and I would like to take on projects where I can be very involved in site. So I really do not have a large office to maintain, and that does not force me to undertake projects that I really don't believe in. The whole idea is to really work and engage in projects that can impact larger sets of people, community, and environment. So I think that frees me with having to deal with high budgets or taking on a lot of commercial projects.
Anand?
So, so this is a very important question, because you need to sustain your practice as well, and the work that you would like to do. So we take professional fees, to be very frank, but it's something that the time span that we take to do this project, you in the end you don't make money, but you lose money. But my point is that I don't want to be rich, but I feel that if I can sustain my basic living and to run an office, I think so far I've been lucky, because I'm also teaching parallelly. So I not to say that I go to academics to make money, but I also like to teach, but I also have that support for the practice. And like Varna, also we have like a very small space, 2 people working always. And I think so far we are also learning how to balance. So far we are not successful in this dynamics, but I think hopefully we will learn better by working.
So, connected to that, if I may, Pranav, just jump in. Simon Bradbury sort of acknowledges, because he's seen the project, acknowledges the time you spent with people in that engagement. And he asks, I think it's the question to Anand, but I think it implies, I think it's valid for both, is that this sort of central value of engagement in that way, how do you see that sustaining in the future? I think, Anand, you've partly answered that question, and I think partly it's got to do with the kinds of partnerships that you make. And Varna, you too. Again, something to think and reflect about. Not trying to get you to give us a perfect answer. Yeah. Simon, we can carry on with that conversation later. It's a harder question in terms of how they would maintain that kind of engagement. I think only time will sort of tell. Pranav, is there anything else? We should have one more question, and then I think we should wrap up because we are out of time.
I'm just going through the questions once again.
I
think there's one question which is specific to the blind school, where I think initially in your process, you showed a circular plan with attachments talking about incrementality, whereas the final plan was different. So I think Lakshay Bansal is curious, how does incrementality work in this project now? Or if that's a concern that changed over your experience.
Yes. So as I said, that this project we started in 2015, and a lot of things changed over the period of time, including the program and the budget and a lot of other things. And also, like, this circular form was, again, as I was saying, that it was very intuitive. I don't know, I was just working, and when I went to Perkins, when I showed the project, they said that this form didn't make sense because in circle there are no edges, and the student might get lost. And I think it made sense that, and that's where the rectilinear, two longer surfaces, two shorter. It's a banal way of describing the process, but this is how it happened. And the logic that the movement space as a basic framework, and classroom as the attachment was something which always was there, and we tried to create that in the process.
Thank you. Before I close, there's a very interesting question for Varna, which I would like to read out because I think it's a thoughtful question. It's from Niti Acharya, and I'm going to read it out, Varna. It says, absolutely mesmerizing work on the landscape of the Big Brewski, especially. How do you deal with the ideology of landscape that people generally have of making it seem tamed, guided, and direct compared to the wild, untamed nature the landscape exists in nature? Do these ideas also affect the work you can accept?
I think, thank you so much. It's such an interesting question. I think, like I said, the aesthetics of it is just an outcome of, the whole design intent. And really, I think people are more open to it when they really understand the functionality of it. For example, in Brewski, it was the ideology of having this whole forage garden and sort of looking at smaller spaces and looking at a submerged underwater space and looking at different mediums in which to grow vegetation. And the resultant idea was that the plants would thrive and the building would somehow decay. So that was the outcome. And I feel people are now more open to ideas of planting strategies and not for it to really feel very manicured. But I hope people in India do realize that we have such a spectacular relationship with landscape that we don't need the banal, or we don't need to really go for so-called tropical landscape. We just need to be contextual in selecting it.
The diversity is just mind-blowing, and what you're saying is we should celebrate that diversity, really.
Yes.
Contextual. Yes. No, thank you very much. So, no, I'm all good things must come to an end, and we run out of time. But these are conversations we are going to keep going on for the whole year. So we have time to pick up on these. We are keeping notes. I hope some of these questions even resurface in other sessions. And we really sincerely hope those of you who are also presenting in these sessions come back and be part of those conversations, because I think that's how we'll be able to build this community, but also bring on board other such formulations that have occurred, Varna, like the group that you've been working with. So I just want to, just in closing, just remind everybody, we have a session on Monday, which is in person, with Christopher Benninger. Christopher Benninger happens to be in Boston. So for those of you who are in the Cambridge area, please come. It will be at 6:30 on Monday, this coming Monday, October 10th, at Gund Hall in room 111. Christopher Benninger, as all of you would know, in South Asia, is the preeminent architect. I think the connection is that he was an alum at the GST. He studied at the GST, worked with CERT, and then went back to India to start the planning school at CEPT, but also set up a practice, set up CDSA, etc. And so it's going to really be a conversation about that journey, about the influences from the 50s and 60s or the 60s that he took back to India. Varna, someone will have this conversation with you 50 years from now. So it'll be that kind of conversation, but please come if you're in the area. We will record it and we will upload it for those of you who can't be here. So we have a parallel in-person lecture series, as you can see from this poster. And then next week on the 15th of October at the same time, we'll have Vinu Daniel and Rohan Chauhan. Rohan Chauhan, I think, joined us for today's session. So he's been part of observing this conversation. And I think that's going to be a very exciting discussion. And in this coming week, we will announce the next 3 Saturdays, so you can block those out in your schedules. I just want to, in closing, just underscore the fact that it's really exciting to create this sort of platform and forum to discuss the architectures of landscape architecture and its many formulations across South Asia. It's such a common conversation, and I hope we can learn from each other. But I think most importantly, in this component of the project, which is emergent practices in South Asia, to see practices that really are giving us a pulse of what the issues are on the ground. And I think for all of you, what you're sharing with us at these stages of your career are really what will become the crucibles of innovation in the future as you engage with a wider range of projects, bigger and smaller projects. Scale doesn't matter, but its intensity does. And so that last question of how you would sustain the values that you're beginning your practice with in the future is something that I think we can all share, mentor each other, and learn from. So I think that really is the spirit of this conversation. And that's why I said some of these questions are just the beginnings of conversations, and please bring them back in our discussions. Thank you again, Varna and Anand. That was really a fascinating set of presentations, and I think we all learned a lot from it and enjoyed it as well. So thank you, and thank you everyone for making the time to attend this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.